Right, so croeso pawb, diolch am adael I mi gwrando i chi. So I'm Wanda, as has been said. I'm sort of still a bit unfamiliar with using we, but I'm trying it out since I found out about ecosexuals. So I thought I could include myself in that group. Um, I'm an artist, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background to Cronecast and my work before and after the pandemic so that I can compare the differences. And I will touch on the artistic and theoretical toolbox that I use to survive, to make art, and to affect transformation in myself and others, and how it changed. I'm going to look at two aspects of working small or smaller under the pandemic as becoming old woman and crone. One aspect is isolation, and the other is the existential threat to nature and ourselves as creatures, creators in nature. So as was just said, I was finishing my PhD when the pandemic started. So I slid from one form of self-imposed isolation into another worldwide break in relationships. So for me, there wasn't the same kind of social happening, although it was experienced very differently under the pandemic. I am an old woman and I live on my own. What pictures come into your mind when I say those things? Western cultural narratives and representations of aging have produced us as disadvantaged and overlooked subjects. And I have been exploring, okay, do it that way. Right, exploring possibilities for reimagining and transforming ideas for becoming old and ways of seeing as aging woman and artist. And my theoretical toolbox includes Deleuze and Guattari's polarities and assemblages, Judith Butler's performativity, Cathy Odell's masochistic contract, Joanna Fru's monster beauty, and Anka Kristofovich's potential monumentalism. Most importantly, I use the concept of imaginary collaboration, working with artists and others who I've never met and who might already be dead. And of course, maybe Kristeva should be added to that. But anyway, the research is ongoing and takes the form in sculpture, drawings, live and documented performances. The work investigates becoming and accumulating as well as loss and decay, but it all begins with the material world. I was brought up surrounded by ideas from the Enlightenment with Descartes' "I think, therefore I am," as if he gave birth to himself. Deleuze proposes that something in the world forces us to think. This something is an object not of recognition, but a fundamental encounter. And this encounter is with the material world and art. I believe it's encounters with art that make it transformational. Simon O'Sullivan said that art creates a crack in the world and another world is created. We are forced to thought and fundamentally changed by this encounter. This is the creative moment between artist, artwork, and viewer. My work has always begun with the material, often using tactile, found, and recycled media, especially material that reminds me of skin, like recycled rubber inner tubes. I like it when it's old and marked with logos, patches, repairs, and rust from tire hubs. At this time in my work, I tended to use large scale, slightly larger than human, which I see as the beginnings of the use of monumentality in my work, exploring becoming crone. One of the tools in my toolbox, which comes under question during the pandemic, with the turn to small scale solutions. I was exploring aging and the scarring and changes in the body caused by breast cancer surgery. And I began to feel the need to emerge from the sculptures. In that previous slide, I was in one of those sculptures that we were performing in. Well, the sculptures are performing in my mind. So perhaps then we were becoming sculpture, because I didn't think of it as a performance of myself. I made a huge film set out of rubber inner tubes from tractors and earth movers, and I got in and emerged from a sculpture so that I'm inside and outside my work at the same time. This work was about an existential threat, but one that only affected me, a bit like my isolation. The existential threat that informs my current work is one of extinction of a planetary ecosystem, and the pandemic is only a symptom of this. This is Joanna Frew, artist and writer, who came up with a concept that she calls monster beauty. Frew asks, how does one live within, yet live against a society in which the perfect picture of beauty thrives? The answer is monster beauty, an aesthetic erotic aptitude fleshed out and inspirited with the essence of Aphrodite. Although Frew grounds monster beauty in the body, it's a process of becoming an inspirited aptitude, not the static asepsis, as she puts it, of perfect beauty, which she likens to death. Before the pandemic, I was a member of 2 feminist collectives exploring aging and protesting against invisibility, particularly in the arts. They were called Sex Centenary and Ex-Sex Centenary later. Although these 2 pre-pandemic groups had many similar aims and concerns as Crones, they were more protest groups about ageism and the lack of representation of old women in the art world, both as subject and artist, and the wider human, social and cultural issues around becoming old woman, rather than an existential threat. The issues of equality remain just as important in the current conditions, and many post-pandemic changes to artistic approach are more of a shift, a question of nuance and paying attention. The work with these groups was more urban than Crones, sometimes with large audiences, but not always. This is Ex-Sex Centenary, sitting in a charity shop window in Glasgow as part of the Buzzcut Festival in Govan. So I think, oh, hang on, you've seen this one already anyway, haven't you? This is Crones. It's a new collective of artists who came together during the first lockdown. And we all identify as older women based in North Wales. We're Lisa Hudson, Lindsay Colburn is here, Rona Bowie, Steph Shipley, who's joined us this afternoon, you can see who you've met, Samina Ali, Emily Mayer and others. And we explore aging, power, identity, eccentricity, and merging with the more than human as a process of becoming. So Crones is currently developing a series of episodes created, performed and filmed in different places and situations with various human and more than human collaborators and participants. We come together to console and conspire. Our first expedition, based Becoming, was made as part of the first Surrealist response that Sarah's already talked about. We made socially distancing outfits based on crinolines, mine's made of rubber alkathene piping for water pipes, and rubber tire, bicycle tire inner tubes covering it. So it's a sort of, I see it still as quite sculptural. Samina came as Sheila in a gig, and Lisa's and Lindsay's were made from fencing wire appropriately. So base Becoming saw us casting off unwanted baggage and making kin with the forest and its creatures. We gave ourselves a simple series of scores for actions These included spinning like a ballerina on top of a jewelry box, casting away unwanted items attached to ourselves, and gathering things from the forest and from the foreshore. Oops. Including collecting rubbish. We came together in a huddle when we forgot what we were doing, and we invented specific cries and sounds to communicate without words. It was part of the first return to nature of the first lockdown, where animals and birds came out from hiding, and it was safe to walk in rural lanes with few cars. Everyone was paying more attention to nature and the land, in particular to tiny mosses and lichens. And to the erotic wrinkles and textures of monster beauty, we added conjoining with trees and intimacy with the soil. In the end, when we left the forest for the shore, we covered ourselves with mud and performed a ritualistic circle dance while chanting words beginning with B. And thus we added ritual to the toolbox. My first Aging Woman collective in 2015 came out of a live art development agency workshop in London with the Mexican masochistic performance artist Rocio Bolivar. It's called From Menopause to Old Age, Alternative Beauty. While working with Rocio, I became aware of Cathy Odell's masochistic contract, where artists breaking taboos about desire and the body form a contract between artist and audience that draws attention to the nature of agreements made in social and cultural relationships. When older women behave in ways that challenge existing social mores and push the boundaries of acceptable behavior, it creates a similar contractual relationship with the audience that can be transformative. But how do you form a contractual relationship with the more than human? How do you have an imaginary collaboration with a being that you meet, such as a tree or a sheep, but cannot talk with? Here the task seems to be to draw on indigenous wisdom and a culture of reciprocity, respect, and paying attention. The task may be difficult, but we must stay with the trouble. This is my foreshadowing slide for the next performance we did in summer 21, the second Surrealist Pandemic Festival, Metamorphosis. This was called Hag Ha Ha Ha. Crones re-entered and explored the town centre after lockdown, seeking small utopic places of regeneration, tending and befriending weeds growing in cracks, and connecting with people through gifts of seedling plants and cakes. We upgraded and refurbished our hats and dresses and decided to approach the small city of Bangor as if we were cowboys entering town. We swaggered using the monumentalism of pre-pandemic performances, but on a polarity of large to very small. Instead of guns, we carried plant sprayers to water the weeds and self-sown plantlets in the town. We had a shopping trolley full of homemade cakes and small plants. There's a small shopping trolley, which we had two trolleys because we also had, you can see on the left here, like a supermarket shopping trolley full of plants and cakes. We had a new set of sounds without words, loving sounds to make towards the little plants, and hums of approval, with less cackling and screeching than took place in the woods. Instead of protesting outside shops, we mourned the closing of shops and did a dance to remember Debenhams in front of it. We talked to people when we encountered them in order to include them. And we still huddled when we forgot what we were doing. Last winter, we made our third expedition to the edge of the land at Dinas Dintle, on the margin of where we live, traveling somewhere and nowhere, becoming sand, bird, wind, and storm. In this exploration, the storm joined our assemblage. Although we're using monumentality in this performance, we played with scale by keeping the small audience that we did have, which was very small, as you can see. I think it's a couple more than that, with binoculars at a distance from us, so that they experienced us as very small. As the further away we journeyed, the smaller we became, and they had to stay in one place. They didn't, but they were supposed to. And they had binoculars in order to, so they could actually play with that scale and move in and out as it was in their control. That was Sarah Pogoda's idea, so thank you for that, because I thought it was really interesting. So the storm joined the assemblage. We extended our relationship with the non-human to include the weather. Our third outing was a long journey. We're battling our own and the planet's extinction. We don't know where we're going, but we're going bravely and with distinction. The shore between land and sea is a liminal place between life and death. So I'd like to finish what I wrote. If we've got time, I'm not sure, have you watching the time? If we've got time, I'd quite like to show one of our films, but we can put a link in the chat if we haven't got time. But I just want, before I finish, just to summarize with a list of the new tools for my theoretical toolbox and the changes I made to the old ones. And that includes radical imagination, which I borrow from Utopia Spark, particularly looking to the past for new ideas and ways of doing things. Ritual and ceremony, gratitude and connection, especially to nature, plants, animals, and the earth. Extending the eroticism of monster beauty to include the more than human. Noticing, paying attention, awareness, and making the conditions for this. And that's also been very much developed in Utopia Spark. Reciprocity and inclusion, taking from the community, plants, people, animals, and land, as well as giving, listening, as well as speaking. And a heightened and a more immediate contractual relationships, a more expressive, I would say, contractual relationship with audiences, and extension of imaginary collaborations also extended to the more than human. Thank you. So who can answer me about the time, whether we can show a 4.5 minute film? Has anyone got the energy for that, to see the Hagira film?
Sarah, is that okay to play the film? It's your show, as they say.
Well, I mean, it's open end now, isn't it?
Yeah, play the film, Wanda. Go for it. Play it. Let's watch it.
Can I have the screen share? I'm going to do it from here, I think.
Yes.
Thanks, Lindsay.
I'll put the link in the chat as well.
Lindsay largely very much made this film, by the way, as a wonderful editor and compiler, so apart from being in it.
Okay. It's always worrying to choose the right screen, isn't it? What have you got? Black?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Spider Solitaire on mine.
Here we go.
Is the sound gone, Lindsay?
I think when Lindsay, you need.
I muted myself because of the bird glitch, and then realised that's going to ruin it. So I'm going to do that again. Sorry. We'll have to have birds on top of
our bird noises. Yeah.
Bydd y crwn cast o'r hen air Nordig casta a'r ffyrdd ac arolwg yn siap herffyr wedi lluostroi. Yn y deunydd wedi ffurfio tu mewn i'n blisyn y corff. O hyneb allan o'n y gragen i sgynod lyried y bryd. Ein yn gysg arthyd yn siap heb ffurf wedi wrthdro. Yn ddeunydd wedi ffurfio tu mewn i'n blisyn y corff. O hyneb allan y gragen i sgynod yn enwedig pan yn cymeru rai i ddiau sefyllfa ergys neu anodd. Hagira, taith yn enwedig pan yn cymeru rai i ddiau sefyllfa ergys neu anodd.
We seem to be having problems with sharing it, don't we, Lindsay? I'm just wondering, maybe we should, the glitch is telling us that we shouldn't have it now because there's something happening with the timing. So perhaps we could leave it to people. If you choose to watch it, you can watch it another time. We'll put the link. Lindsay, would you, I'll get the link for the thing and put it in the chat.
Are you speaking Welsh in the video?
Yes, it's not me, it's my daughter-in-law. It's Sarah's voice speaking Welsh, yes. So the sound is in Welsh and then the translation is in subtitles, but we couldn't hear it properly. So I think it probably needed to be, maybe because there's more people or something, I don't know. It's not it, so the timing's all wrong.
I could only just hear it. Suddenly I thought, isn't that Wanda's voice over the top of this song? Because I can hear it, obviously. Sorry, I went on too long.
Should we move into some questions then, perhaps, or some responses for Wanda from a lot of work that you showed, including that last piece, but there's a lot of your work that was really interesting. You can kind of see where all of these ideas come from. I kept thinking about that phrase that Mary Russo uses in The Female Grotesque. She talks about the unruly woman. And I think you seem to be all unruly women, yes. Which I quite like, the breaking that kind of homogenous idea of what we think of as the aging female. And I also, the binoculars, although you were using them as a kind of device to talk about smallness, I actually thought was a really interesting metaphor that for this aging or representations of aging women in contemporary culture, in that we need binoculars to see them. We need binoculars to find them. We can't find them. They don't exist. They're so hidden. So I quite like that idea of kind of almost looking for these figures in our culture. I don't know if that was something that you intended.
No, but I love it. It's funny that thing about looking for them. I spent a whole day in Cardiff Museum looking for old women in the collection, both on the walls or sculptures and also as artists, and there were very, very few. Interestingly enough, the only place I found quite a few was in one room which had been given over to a homeless charity, which was run by homeless people from the charity who then got jobs in it and were running it. And they were given a space to curate from the collection of the museum. And that was, although the group, as I looked at it, was, I think there was roughly half and half gendered, one more man, I think. They had chosen, there were more old women in that room than anywhere than the rest of the museum combined in those artworks, and more women artists as well, which was really interesting because that was nothing to do with their choices, and it was a really good exhibition actually. So yes, so the very few women I found were wives of industrialists and things like that, very few, and the sisters from Greganog, the cultural patrons, and then there was some generic, you often get these kind of female vessels of all ages, but there was a couple of crone type sculptures that represented unpleasant characteristics like envy or spite and things like that, where there's a kind of patriarchal idea of what women's attributes should be is put into the empty vessel of a female sculpture, virtues of a young, beautiful one, vices into a crone. But the real people were mostly men in equivalent of suits.
Yeah, really interesting, really interesting. Are there any other questions or thoughts? Nick, with a real hand.
A real hand and a gold hand. Thank you so much. I thought the headpieces or the sculptures on the beach were incredible, and the images that you captured. I was very curious about the either your own responses as performing entities or people's responses at this sort of city center. So I'm so aware of, presences or images of youth in stores, selling clothing, or what high street fashion is supposed to look like, and that older bodies are not visible, and certainly those that appear to be behaving out of character or deviant, like what I think of street characters and those presences. And how did you, I don't know what the presence was like of other people, but what were your own responses to those two different contexts? One of the sort of the seaside where you had the wind and there weren't many other sort of human occupations visible, versus the one that was mediated by commerce and youth, perhaps.
I think we were in the town. I think we're mostly welcomed as a kind of entertainment to some extent, and people like being given things. I think some people were quite touched by being given things, and some people didn't want to take them, quite naturally because of the pandemic as well, but some did. Children really liked us, unequivocally. They followed us. Some children followed us. The noticeable, occasionally we get very positive responses from women of a similar age who might want to join us sometimes. Sometimes they don't want to be associated, so there's a negative thing. And then there's quite often a quite equivocal response by young men who get horribly embarrassed or upset. And actually in the previous one, the one in the charity shop window, we went back with a film person to try out some different poses as shop dummies. And we were in the charity shop. And in Govan, in Glasgow, there's a train that does a loop. And there's a group of young lads who do a kind of pub crawl on that loop. They get out at each stop and have a drink. And they left the pub just outside the charity shop window. And when they noticed us, they went into this tribal behavior of jump. We put it all on film. It was wonderful. It was completely accidental. Jumping up and down, like looking very much like apes, kind of, ooh, 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 and then started chanting a kind of football chant and bashing on the window of the charity shop so that we thought they might break it. And I was really worried because they'd been hospitable and let us in. And they carried on. And then they didn't notice that someone was filming them because they were just standing still and they were all drunk. And then they noticed the film, and one of them put his hands in front of his penis like a little boy. You know, when they're caught out, they put their hands in front of their willies. It was really funny. And then they all kind of calmed down a bit and went away. So it's kind of lucky they noticed the camera, actually. They suddenly became conscious of what they were doing to us. So that was a bit of a gift, really, that behaviour, because we got this really good film, and it got played in another festival in Edinburgh with something about Pussy Riot, who we associate with. Yeah, so yeah.
But one of the interesting things in the high street was that because it had basically been abandoned by the mainstream, it was full of people who, it was like a whole subculture or subcultures had taken over, and they were all really, I just was amazed. I thought no one would want anything. People would try and keep away, but it felt like, I don't know, I was really surprised by how welcomed we were, including by young men. You know, you can see in the video people going thumbs up, and there's this great bit where a bloke is interacting with us saying what he's growing, and then in the end he goes, "Oh no, don't film me, I've got no teeth," like that. And as he says that, this woman walks past in her slippers, like, I don't know, and then you get this Asian family following us along, and I don't know, it felt really, there's a lot of homeless people around, and people took stuff from us, and that was the thing I thought was amazing. Yeah, to the point where it was almost like you weren't performing at all, really, you were just moving around. Whereas on the beach, the performance was a struggle. I mean, you didn't have to perform again at all because you were literally struggling, because the things that it had really, it doesn't even really show quite how windy it was.
Honestly, the weather, it never looks as extreme, does it, in the film? It was we were soaking wet and freezing cold. The wind was so strong. We had to walk all of it with one hand holding on to those things so that it wouldn't break our necks, really. I think particularly Lindsay and I had pretty huge headdresses, didn't we? Steph, yours is quite big, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So I didn't mention that Steph was also, did I mention that or not? Anyway, Steph was with us. So yes, it was very extreme, but it's amazing how you get the kind of power to do things in those, when you're in that performance zone, that you could go down the beach, and I was really worried everyone was going to get really ill. It was so wet, and traveling back in the car, even with the heater on, because we were so wet, it starts to evaporate, so you're still cold, you know. And Steph had a really long journey, didn't you? I was worried.
That's true. I think there was a real contrast between, and I am very grateful to Wanda and Lindsay and all who were involved in how I was invited to the Bangor episode. And I just think, and then Dennis Lynch, and those extremes of conditions really were affecting on us and the audience, as Wanda has described them. But I had a sense, and now looking back on both, that the warmth, we were midsummer, weren't we, in June, and we were confident, and we were slow moving, and we were really sort of part of that space. And people who I think had been so locked down, they were just entranced by the whole, our weaving our way through the streets. But on the beach, it was different. It was more internal looking. It was intense, and yet we were completely bonded as women on that beach. It was, as they've all described, it was epic, it was intense, and it was against all the odds. And I was much less aware of what was of audience at all, which was quite, and we were, the actual physicalness of it was much more intense and less upright than what it was for me. I was trying to hang on to everything. But it was amazing. Thank you.
I mean, I would really like to think further. I mean, that's very speculative, but I don't have to do that free thinking of what Wanda said about the weather winning agency, you know, and becoming weather as well. And for me, I think that's something I definitely take home from the whole festival and also the post-festival events, how non-human beings, be them alive or not, really gain agency, but you need to do a lot of art to make that happen, and also to see that agency. And I think particularly with the weather on that day, I mean, we get amber warnings all the time about weather conditions in North Wales at that time of the year. But then the weather turns into something else as well. And we really, that's another technique to the toolkit. I'm not sure whether Utopia's Bach has one as well, this deep listening. And of course, the weather talks different than us. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, good one. Yes, with that, yes, that listening, it says it's very difficult. Since it started, I've got two new imaginary collaborations. The first one was with the Sibyl of Cumaea, who may or may not be in Hades, because she more or less disappeared. She was given a very long life, as long as these grains of sand that she had collected by Apollo. And who knows if they've run out yet, because she shrank so much that she disappeared until only her voice was left. And now we can't hear the voice, but it doesn't mean she might not still be there with just a very, very small voice. And she used to give her prophecies through oak leaves in her cave. And when people came, they had to read the oak leaves, and if it was a draft of wind or with their coming, and they got mixed up, she didn't try and rearrange them. They had to do some deep reading, I suppose, from the oak leaves. So I've been trying to sort of summon her through oak trees and oak leaves and listen to, initially to her, but now I'm thinking just the trees themselves, trying to listen to them. And also my other imaginary collaboration is with dinosaurs, small dinosaurs only. And that's millions of years ago, and a creature very, very different from me. The only message I think I've had is stay small. That's the message I think I've had from very small dinosaurs, because they're the ones that seem to have survived. Because I wanted them to give me advice on how to avoid extinction, having experienced it themselves. That's why I chose them. Plus I found out there's a link between Crystal Palace and Treborth, where our studios are, and those performances with the dinosaurs in Crystal Palace. And I used to live there with the concrete dinosaurs, if anyone's been there.
I think I remember when I was a child in Germany, there was this outdoor, like Greenwood, I don't know, do you call it entertainment park, where you go and there were some attractions, and there were these concrete but painted dinosaurs as well, in kind of original sizes. Now that you mention it, everything comes back.
Yeah, the ones in Crystal Palace are not quite accurate. They're a bit like early, paintings of elephants, and when people didn't quite know what they looked like. So some of the dinosaurs there. And when I lived in Crystal Palace, the whole park was really run down and neglected, and they would just fall into bits and come. But it's all been done up now, and Crystal Palace is really posh now. It wasn't when I lived there. But it was lovely actually. It was really healing to go back there, because it was quite an unhappy time in my life. Yeah.
You know what always fascinated me about dinosaurs, but maybe that's a fact that isn't a fact but fiction, that someone told me, but these really, the huge ones, like 32 meter of size, that if you, I don't know, bite them into their tail, it takes like a minute for them to realize that someone bit in their tail. That kind of, which of course, I always think, oh yeah, bureaucracy.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
But that might be a fiction. I'm not sure whether that's really true. But
well, the message from the dinosaurs might also be a fiction, but who can say? I doubt that my listening to these creatures has got that good already, really, because I'm still not sure if the oak leaves have told me anything. Keep trying.
So, Wanda, your message from the dinosaur to stay small,
Yeah.
how does that relate to your monstrous, monumental kind of work that you were doing before? Is it kind of challenging you?
Well, it is challenged me, and that's a very good point. I mean, I've been making little things, you know, with Lindsay and everybody, with little tiny figures, because I always used to have that little, you know, like the antithesis of what I did, to do tiny things with little kind of figures from like railway, you know, kind of things that you put in railways. Like there's a word for that in art history, which I collected, which is staffage in landscapes, is when people are very small and just put in a staffage. So we made some little small miniature gardens and things. But I've got a whole series now of, you know, those Victorian domes that you put stuffed birds and things in. I've got quite a number of those. And I was thinking of Superman. You know how Superman's city was in this kind of dome like that, Krypton, or is that the name of the city, Krypton? Where his family, you could talk to his dad, and he'd go and visit the city, and they're all kind of shrunk in miniature in this little city. So I thought of making some little miniatures to go in there, and some miniature crones. Lisa's made a miniature crone already, hasn't she, Lindsay? Yes, and also have I got it here? Yes, I have. When the Cumaean Sibyl was shrinking, they put her in an amphora. So I did buy this little glass bottle off eBay, because it looks a bit like an amphora, and I want to make some little things of the Sibyl, maybe a little shrunken Sibyl in the amphora, and maybe using Sarah's voice. Now, Sarah did the voiceover, which you didn't hear properly, unfortunately, because it's really wonderful. She did several voices for our film. She's a singer, my daughter-in-law, and I thought maybe she could be the voice of the Sibyl as it disappears in a little thing, but whether I'll do that or not, I don't know. That's a plan. So yeah, small, but I don't know, you sort of make these comparisons and I might not necessarily stick to those rules, Marilyn.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I think the reason I asked in a way was because when you kind of think about how women, particularly of older generation, have been socialized. We've all been socialized to not take up very much room, and not to speak very loudly, and it has the kind of opposite response in me. I use lots of megaphones in my performance because I haven't been allowed to speak very loudly, and I kind of feel like I want to take up more space. So I'm kind of really interested in the idea of the unruly, monstrous things.
Yes.
And your crones were that. They were taking up much more space than they needed to. And they were, you know, the classical body is so contained, yet these structures and assemblages were sort of seeping and secreting in a kind of social space, which I really enjoyed.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, we call those skirts socially distancing, but it's a bit tongue-in-cheek because actually it's socially taking up quite a lot of space and encroaching as well, isn't it? So there's generally a kind of two-sided thing, or at least to many of the...
they're very, very playful, and I really enjoyed the dance for Debenhams. I had a very big smile, which I like the kind of playful quality, and there's this kind of a ludic playfulness that kind of brought us back to Nick's presentation as well. So I think I kind of really enjoyed those things because they were part of that term social, aren't they? And all of the things that we've been talking about, the collective, and the idea that those interactions have been really important. And I think for you, really resonant in your work because it's got this kind of feminist history, which was all about the collective of women, about the solidarity of a group and the connections and what that assemblage does. So yeah, really interesting.